Hello, I'm Lindley Gooden. You are watching the third installment of Future of Utilities, the online series. Great to have you with us. This is the final session today where we'll be asking the question, has coronavirus sidelined net zero? What a controversial question. With attention diverted towards COVID-19, the UK's efforts towards the net zero commitment have been put slightly on the back burner. Although the pause might only be temporary with the cancellation of COP26, there are bound to be significant delays. So we've got around 40 minutes, just under, to look at the contribution of the utilities industry in reducing the carbon emissions of the UK economy. First, let's meet our amazing panelists. Rachel McEwen. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Lindsay.
Great to have you with us. Rachel is the Chief Sustainability Officer at SSE. Great to have you with us. Next, we have David Riley. Hello, David.
Good afternoon.
Good to see you. David is the head of carbon neutrality at Anglian Water. Thirdly, we have Stuart McLaren. Hello, Stuart.
Hi, everyone.
Wonderful to have you here. Stuart is the technical director at Atkins. And last but not least, we have Graeme Cooper. Hello, Graeme.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Great to see you. Graeme is the project director for transport decarbonisation at National Grid. Great to have you all here today. Okay, we have lots to cover. I'm sure you have your own questions or comments for us. So as ever, for the final time today, send your questions to us using the live Q&A field on your screen to the right of us. We'll get to as many as we can towards the final part of our discussion today. Let's start with that question. Has net zero been sidelined by coronavirus? We've got about half an hour to discuss and deliberate on how we can build our capacity and competency as a nation and an industry to deliver a low carbon future despite what's happened lately. Let's get stuck in. Graeme, first of all, how do you think coronavirus has impacted timelines for net zero?
So, well, let's take it into two little bite-sized chunks. As a business, the coronavirus has probably added we had a sort of pause for about 2 weeks as National Grid, only because we needed to get safe methods of work so that we could continue delivering the gas and power that everybody needs. Yeah. So we now are, as an industry, are functioning, corona safe. So as our business proceeds, there's not really been any delay or impact for coronavirus on the journey to net zero. We're all busy beavering away at our desks. I think, but at a national level, yes, there is that challenge, I think, that the short-term impact of the coronavirus will have to have had some impact. And the corresponding, I guess, the thing that we're not really yet seeing is how deep is the recession that's been caused by this. But I also think there's a useful piece here, which is collectively as a planet, we've observed a challenge, we have considered it, acted, and almost as a planet, taken action against corona. So actually that collective will could actually be a really, really strong blueprint for us to collectively get behind sort of reinvigorating the net zero journey.
We did. I mean, we'll all remember those maps early on when we saw parts of China turning from red to green or whatever color you select. Saw a big improvement. And David, there have been steps forced on us, but actually steps nevertheless that have made a difference. Can't we just hold on to some of that for a while?
Exactly, Lindley. I mean, it's all about that resetting our approach, because we are really seeing some opportunities. In the same way that we need to adapt to climate change, we're adapting out the way we are thinking and the way we are approaching the challenge of net zero carbon. So I've seen real momentum in this space since probably around about 2018. And that was from a UN report when we were looking at the impacts of a 1.5 degree increase in temperatures. And the leadership that we've seen since 2018 across different sectors, and in particular, for example, in the water sector, where last year we announced the commitment to deliver net zero carbon by 2030, that's still happening despite the impacts of COVID. And in fact, the work that goes on in the background is still going at a pace. So the sector delivering a route map by September, that will still happen. Delivering a toolkit in the industry by October, that will still happen. But the reset is around the leadership, transformations that are coming through, and what we can learn from the environment that we're now in.
Yeah, leadership is so important. I mean, the thing is, Rachel, COP26 has been postponed. Inevitably that will be a blow to the people involved and to so many people coming to the UK to be there. But what good effects, what narrative, what can we take away from that could be an opportunity?
So I suppose I don't really think that 12 months of a delay makes an enormous difference to international negotiations on climate change. I think that the objective of COP26 is for toughened, more ambitious, nationally determined contributions, and the UK government wants as many countries to be on net zero as possible, and they're right to do that, because if every country on the planet agrees to being net zero by 2050, then as a planet we've got a 50% chance of bringing about the 1.5 warming scenario. So it is only half a chance, if you know what I mean. So it is of exactly the same significance as it was 7 months ago before we'd heard of coronavirus as it is today. So I think in terms of the opportunities, if you take it from a parochial perspective in the UK, we've got 12 months we've basically got more time. So our kind of best foot forward that we're putting forward in Glasgow in November 2021, it means that we don't just need to talk about promises, we can talk about the result of actions, especially in the context of the green recovery. As a company, we put forward a green print last month at the beginning of June, which is basically it was intended to be like a helpful starter for 10 for government on all the things that could be sped up in terms of the journey to net zero that would also have a positive impact on jobs and GDP. So those are the positive things. I suppose the point is that there are also risks, and I guess my biggest worry is that while there is almost like a frenzy of consensus across government and business and industry and society in favour of a green recovery, it is one thing to believe that in rhetoric, and it is another thing to deliver it in reality, and that there will be some tough decisions that need to be made in quite short order, really. And my nervousness is whether or not the government and others are in a position to be able to take those quite bold, brave decisions.
Yeah, it's great in principle, of course, but actually, the danger, I suppose, the elephant in the room is that industry will rubber band back into what it was doing before, and possibly even more, to make up some money. That there must be a concern there, Graeme, and I'll come on to Stuart with technology in a second. But Graeme, there must be a concern there that, of course, we need to make up for the missing months. Yeah, no, certainly. But I think there is a real feel of that build back better, right? So the corona sort of pause, or the corona situation we find ourselves in. Sectors are needing bailing out and needing support. So why would government support to get you back to where you were when there's a great opportunity to actually support you and get you to where you're going? I mean, there's some interesting ones out there as examples. So the French government supported Air France, but only on journeys that were longer than would naturally could have been covered by rail. What a great way of sort of articulating it. So in the same way, the UK, our biggest GDP sector, is automotive. Now, automotive is staring down the double whammy of Brexit and the freedom movement of goods and people, but Corona as well. So there's a real opportunity that you say, well, okay, that's a sector that government is going to have to help out, but don't help it out to get to where it was. Help it out so that it's on the journey to net zero. And I think there is a consciousness there. But I think what it also does is it focuses the mind. If you're in need of a handout of support, whatever comes with the bailout, there's some rules attached. So there's some negotiation to be done there that I think could significantly help us. But I think that could help us make the leap forward to make up for the lost time. There's the policy level, and also then reaching consumers, us lot, so that we will change our behaviour. There has been a big change in behaviour. Stuart, what about technology? What role does technology have to play in, hopefully keeping us on the straight and narrow and reaching targets that we need to reach, but also, in terms of our behaviour, in terms of making sure that we are, trying to minimise our impact?
Yeah. So I mean, it's a simple question, isn't it? What the role of technology? But I think the answer is pretty complex. And technology the role it has in this is key, but it's definitely not a panacea. And when you look at the scenarios that have been modelled, the CCC scenarios and the potential pathways that we will take, it feels like currently there's probably an over-reliance on technology. And so I think there's always a a need to make sure that we're not putting all of our eggs in that technology basket, but it will be central. However, the thing to remind ourselves is actually it's our collective behaviours as a society that will really drive change. So looking at our consumption habits, our travel choices, our diet, that's really the root of the problem. And yes, technology can facilitate a wholesale sort of cultural and societal shift, as it can make carbon visible to us. It can help us make more informed choices about how we do things and what we do and where we do them. So it is important, but I think, let's not lose sight that as individuals, there's an awful lot on us. But even within that, the way I see technology's influence on net zero, it probably manifests in three key ways. We've got technology as plant. That's certainly how I see it. And by that I mean, your hydrogen production facilities, your offshore wind turbines, and the innovations around them, solar, biomass, nuclear, such as small modular reactors. An awful lot of investment and innovation that's going to be needed to drive these big technologies to decarbonise some key elements. There's also technology as it manifests in sort of efficiencies in manufacturing and product development, bringing those to market, which will be key in helping create circular economies, which actually have quite a big link to then the design process, which is where I see digital technology as it relates to system-wide technology. So enabling smart networks, demand-side response will be critical as a new energy system gets created, and we're going to need that to be the system of systems thinking, as we have to figure out how all of these disparate things all actually have to come together. And as you change one thing, it has an influence and an impact on another, and we've got to get a handle on how technology can give us that view. In terms of decarbonising the broader infrastructure play, and which is obviously quite important within the utilities as sort of linear infrastructure assets, static infrastructure assets, I think it's got an enormous part to play in how we design, how we approach the design and asset management elements of the things that we want to build and what they do. So you look at if we want to bring these schemes quicker to market, there's talk of deregulation, if you will, looking at how we streamline bringing market projects to market. Well, actually, let's look at how we automate and digitize the planning and EIA process so we can bring these schemes to market quicker. Tools that integrate carbon into intervention calculations and modelling, looking at marginal abatement cost curves, making those integrated within the design process. How you get carbon data integrated within the 3D, 4D, 5D modelling capabilities, so that we are designing carbon out, not only to reduce it, but also enabling us to make choices to make sure we can create things like the circular economies, so that when we come to asset decommissioning, we're making those decisions. So, and then ultimately it's about moving towards digital twins, carbon digital twins, and how that links to, say, a national digital twin, say that the Centre of Digital Built Britain are moving. And that is going to need a fundamentally different way for us to collectively work together to create the system of system thinking, and how we're going to get greatest value out of technology to enable these things. So it's a big challenge, but all the components are there. All the thinking is happening. It's about how we come together now as a collective to really make this real. And again, leadership will be key. Having a coordinated oversight is going to be essential.
I mean, Stuart's manifesto, Rachel, you had a green print. Stuart's covered nearly every issue and solution that we could potentially talk about today.
Sorry.
But that's right. It's so coherent. Getting there, though, David, is not easy. And Stuart just talked about leadership. Leadership from within, leadership at a policy, at a government level. Also, we can't help but think about it from a consumer point of view. So, where does, we as consumers need to en masse alter our behavior, stay altered? We've already altered it in some ways. But where does leadership come in, David?
It really comes in. There's two key elements in my mind. So it's as an organisation, it's understanding the reasons why reducing carbon and delivering against net zero is so important. So this is here for the long term. It's not something that we are told to do. It's something embedded in the organisation, where leadership sets the tone and the values and the policies to support the direction that we are going in. So, for example, within Anglian Water, our purpose is to bring environmental and social prosperity to our region. Why is that important? Well, from a climate change perspective, we get 2/3 of the average annual rainfall in the UK. so we're susceptible to drought. We're very, very flat, and we've got an extensive coastline, so flooding becomes an issue. So when you put together strong reasons as to why you've got a real impact from climate change, then you connect into aligning the value chain. So we know that we cannot deliver against the significant carbon challenges that we face without the support of product suppliers, bringing in the low carbon products and solutions and technologies that Stuart talked about, bringing in the designers to actually design in those assets to the solutions that we need, the contractors looking at our sites of how we build these assets in a low carbon way. So that alignment all the way through from product suppliers to us as clients, through a regulator's government and through to customers is so important in terms of delivering against our net zero ambition. This cannot be achieved in silos. It's got to be achieved with that alignment against the goal.
Every industry talks about ecosystems. I think in our case today, talking about net zero, you can never be more justified than talk about ecosystems. And, you know, Rachel, David talks about, you know, everybody in the value chain, everybody being able to fit into it. But it's about, you need commercial solutions. You need to be able to work together to do business. Otherwise, the incentive isn't necessarily there. That's got to be at the forefront of your mind, hasn't it?
Yes. So I suppose the question's about commercial solutions through the value chain, and I kind of want to go up a level about the framing of the solution that is created. So if you think that the purpose of business is to provide profitable solutions to the problems of people and planet, and particularly in our sectors, then the government framing of, for example, contracts for difference, which is the very smart policy instrument that has brought about increased offshore wind. Now, to put this in context, I joined the industry 13 years ago. At that point, or just after that, our chief executive gave us as a team the challenge of bringing down the cost of offshore wind. At the time, it was nearly £200 per megawatt hour. Last September, because of contracts for difference, the strike price that was found was £40 per megawatt hour. That basically means offshore wind is the cheapest form of electricity. Now, what that did was it delivered a social value, the social value of cheaper electricity prices. But I think what has happened is that there is another social value, which is about the industrialisation and about jobs and manufacturing jobs. I'm getting to the point of your question in a second. And I think that there is maybe time for a value exchange from society that basically says, yes, prices are cheap, but actually we need to rebuild our manufacturing base, and that what we need are jobs. Now, the way in which you achieve all that is from, at the highest level, a framing from government of what wants to be achieved. And then you set the companies loose to go and achieve it, but they do that hand in glove with the supply chain. So it isn't companies just like SSE that brought about £40. It was the fact that we worked unbelievably closely with Siemens and all the other different OEMs in order to bring about that. So, but what there was at the beginning was that clarity of purpose and that clarity of the problem that needed to be solved. And I think that's how you bring it all together.
It's really, if I'd known, I didn't know that. If I'd known that the prices of wind-generated energy were so low, I'd be wanting to scream from the rooftops to my customers about that, because actually that's a victory, right? So these little victories along the way are very important. Graeme, in brief.
Well, it's a really, I mean, just to pick up on that point, sorry to dive in, but up until about 2017, the dirtiest thing we did as a country was make power. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, but due to the growth of onshore and offshore wind, this year we will have made more power as a country from clean sources than from burning stuff. Yeah. And that is fundamental. We're really leading the way. We're the windiest place in Europe. We've got the best offshore wind industry. But what's then really interesting is how that scales from here. So building on the success that Rachel's indicated, we've got just shy of 10 gigawatts of offshore wind in the UK. There's going to be at least another 30 coming in the next 10 years. So it took us 25 years to get to 10 gigawatts. It's going to take us 10 years to get to somewhere between 30 and 40 gigawatts of offshore wind on the system. But coming back to Stuart's point about how do you then need to have that whole systems thinking, when it's very, very windy and demand is very low, the price of energy starts to collapse. So if we can decarbonise heat and transport at the same rate as we're building out more renewables, then actually you get a symbiotic relationship. You can dump the spare, low cost wind energy into people's hot water tanks and into their cars at a time when it's clean and cheap. And then you can pause doing that when there's less wind on the system and the price goes up. So actually what we need to do is stop thinking in silos. I mean, as an energy person trying to help the transport sector, I meet so many people talking about the brilliant vehicle that's coming to market, the brilliant charging solution that's going to make the world simple and easy, and a great digital platform. But none of them ever ask where the power's coming from and the utility infrastructure that's going to bring it. They just assume that it's going to be there when they need it. And this is why a more collaborative whole system approach and a discussion needs to be really important, but driven by that big sort of the big clarity of policy that Rachel indicates.
And just to pick up on that, if that's okay. I mean, it feels like I sometimes like to think like the NetZero challenge is in essence like it's a project. UK PLC have gone, right, I want to buy a project or a program and I've got to deliver it by 2050, and it's an Olympic Park. There's a dead date, it's a drop dead date. We've got to make this big thing. It's difficult, it's hard, it requires lots of different people to do lots of different things. And we need, and you know, on a project like that, you would have a project director or a project manager. You'd have a guiding mind overseeing this thing. And at the minute, I think what feels like is missing, especially given the complexity of the systems we're trying to overhaul and the whole of system change that needs to happen in a coordinated dance to the future as we arrive all at the same time, enabling each other to do the things we want to do. The thing that feels like is missing is that guiding central mind, from an energy perspective, like a systems architect or something of that ilk. And even at government level is, does this warrant some almost a separate department or some kind of oversight that says actually, because every aspect of the economy, every industry, every sector, all of us individually are going to have to make choices, make changes, influence, do things differently. And that won't, yes, you can get so far by a bottom-up approach, by us all doing our best to work collaboratively, but actually we need that visionary sort of guidance to make sure that the whole thing is being coordinated as if it was a project to be delivered on time, to program and to quality. And to me, I don't know, maybe it's just I'm biased because that's kind of the environment in which I live in, but it's a task that we need to make more tangible so people can engage with it that bit better and put some fire behind it.
But you must all be very frustrated about that, because you want the leadership. Yes, you want consumers to come on side. Actually, us lot, the consumers, are actually starting to buy into this. We understand the why this is important, and we're starting to slowly and very slowly get involved with our energy supply. We're changing suppliers in order to get involved in this, and we're often going for green energy. Yes, we're looking at price, but we're also looking at green energy. Graeme, and I'll go to David in a second about the frustrations as well. But what does frustrate you? What common factors could we jiggle free and make it a lot easier to achieve this?
Oh, crikey. If you look at from the consumer looking up, just show people that they can contribute. One of the strange things, it's always makes me laugh. Nobody knew they needed a smartphone till somebody showed you their smartphone, right? And then you wanted one, right? So in the same way, when you're looking at decarbonisation of transport, put people in an electric car, let them bust their own myth, let them have it for a few days and realise that it's not some second tier rate transport system. It's great. So I think from a consumer, there's the shift. It shouldn't be telling, it should be showing, right? Yeah. So I think from the consumer perspective, I also think that we also need to pick the battles that we can connect with people on. One of the things that frustrates me greatly is we have great clarity from the Committee on Climate Change on what we need to do. But that is advice to government. That's not advice to consumers. We need that interpretation down to a consumer level. What can you and I do as individuals? Yeah. But I also think there is that slightly sort of existential challenge that you've got, that as an individual, you think, well, climate change is really big and global, and it's really, and what can I do? What can little me do that really will make an impact? And actually, if we all do something little, we'll have a huge impact. But I also think the other bit that's missing here is, and it links very closely to it, is we all get worried about the number of people dying and being impacted by corona. Do you know that 40,000 people, so that's more than 100 every day, die from the impacts of poor air quality in the UK? No one's jumping up and down about that. And if we stop burning stuff through engines and through boilers and what have you, actually the air quality agenda becomes hyper-local. Yeah. So one of the things that occurs to me is you need to connect with people on a level where they can directly hear, feel, see, taste, smell the difference they're making. And that's why the current lockdown, or the lockdown that we had, where people suddenly realised it was quiet outside and the air was cleaner, actually should be used as a really good catalyst to link the air quality agenda with the climate agenda, because you can connect. You've got two chances of connecting with people.
Well, look, I mean, absolutely right. I mean, we have to go to audience questions very shortly, but David, that makes a lot of sense. I think we've all, and if you work in the air industry, of course, it's been a different feeling altogether. But many of us who are near, air lanes, air traffic lanes, have relished the more natural way of life. The air quality seems better. All that stuff, the anecdotal stuff we've talked about. This is real to consumers. But again, we're back to leadership. The people that are in charge of the decision making need to absolutely be informed as well, don't they? So, what do we need right now to push this forward, bearing in mind we've lost a few months?
So can I tell you what we're likely to get, just as a quick one?
Go to
David.
I'll throw it to David. Sorry. Yeah, David, what do you think?
See, you're very keen, Graeme. What I would basically say is that historically, we would not walk past, we would not take for granted health and safety in terms of our approach. If we look today, we would not walk past an unsafe act. We do not apply that same rigour and behaviour to carbon within leadership across the UK. So we see pockets of best practice out there. We see some fantastic client groups demanding low carbon solutions, but we do not see it as a business as usual. We see some fantastic contractors, some fantastic developers. It needs to get to more of a business as usual behaviour. And where that then leads to are examples that we've seen recently where we've got an effluent discharge into a watercourse in Norfolk, where a developer approached us to say, can he take that waste heat, it's not a waste, it's a heat, use that to generate heat and cooling into the largest glass house in Europe that's currently under construction, and produce 10% of the UK tomatoes. Now that's classed as low, it's reducing carbon by 75% alone. So that's the low carbon solution of agriculture feeding off what was a waste heat in a water recycling centre. That's the approach that we need to understand carbon as the next health and safety issue of old, that we do not walk past a low carbon solution.
Yeah, we will keep going around this whole situation, Rachel, very briefly before we go to audience questions. This whole situation of it being too big for us, that we make such a small difference as consumers, but actually, those little wins, you mentioned wind energy, these wins, you need that positive reinforcement that actually we can make a difference. By the way, this did make a difference. That's important, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I suppose the thing I was thinking about when you were asking what your frustrations, and I was trying to think what was the frustration, and it's not actually a frustration, it is a worry, and it is related to people. So right now, you feel like there is public consent for some of the big actions that need to be taken at a system level. So yes, we do need to bring about behaviour change, but actually a lot of this needs to be done at the system level to take carbon out of everything, out of our industrial processes, out of our transport, all of that to be done almost for the people, and beyond that, some behavioural change as well. But my concern is that the consent from the public in its widest sense is only there if it is done fairly. So this notion of a just transition, I think, is going to be a bigger thing for us to be concerning ourselves with over the next decade. I'm a member of the Scottish Government's Just Transition Commission, and we're taking evidence just now. And one of the things that's dawned on us is that in some sectors, the transition is speeded up, and it's speeded up almost arguably in a disorderly way, which brings about bad social impacts. So you take oil and gas in Aberdeen right now, there are jobs going right now. We thought we might have some time to be able to manage that transition carefully now, but that's just one example. There are others. So air quality, that example earlier, if the improvements in air quality are only on richer neighbourhoods and not on poorer neighbourhoods, that's not okay. So it's the distribution of the good things associated with the transition to net zero, as well as the way in which the costs of that are allocated. So my point is really about public consent and bringing the people with you, and the way to do that is by making sure you do it fairly and you really think these things through.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for that. You may have noticed that Stuart's back on a different aspect ratio. He's showing off. He's come back with a different camera, slightly bit of a breakup, but he's back with us, which is great. So a couple of questions here. Let's get through them nice and quickly if we can. We've got about 7 minutes left. Paul Jarman, thank you very much for writing in, Paul. Do you see the electrification of transport as a challenge to network capacity or a solution because of the flexibility of smart charging and V2G? Graeme, can I just throw that to you just briefly?
Yes.
I mean, this, where's the power come from? You raised it earlier on.
Yeah, so there is a real strong symbiotic relationship, right? So the networks up until now have been built for consumers who just consume when they consume. So you build to the evening peak, a winter evening plus headroom. Whereas actually, if we can smear that demand across time, we actually sweat the assets better. But also, the cost and carbon intensity of the power moves throughout the day. So actually, as part of as much as a potential problem, actually, it's as much as a part of the solution. So as I mentioned before, there is a symbiotic relationship that growth in decarbonising heat and transport will actually allow wind and renewables further deployment, because effectively you create a price floor where that power could disappear into batteries and water tanks. And at the same time, that means electric heating and electric transport should get cleaner and cheaper. And that technology is already available now. So I have a very dynamic energy tariff, and my car and my heating only works when, only recharges when the grid is clean and cheap. But then that links back to Rachel's point, which is not everybody can do that. So how do we make sure that it's a managed transition where no one's left behind? But yes, there is a great relationship between the two. The grid will cope.
Really interesting question here, which is a really big one. I think we just referred to it a little bit earlier on. What's the UK's role in the global puzzle? How can we improve our influence? David, can I throw it to you just briefly? It is... we are known around the world for the tech. We are known for the expertise, but I guess I don't know how big a voice we really have in the global scale.
So one of the successes that we've had when we've been talking about approaches to reducing carbon within infrastructure over the last few years is documents such as the HM Treasury Infrastructure Carbon Review, which is a leadership document, and more recently a document produced through the Green Construction Board and BSI, and that's past 2080 Carbon Management and Infrastructure. That's an excellent framework that provides organisations with the how to reduce emissions across the value chain again. And that's being used globally. That's being used within the UK, and it's started to be used by infrastructure organisations out there as well. So that is taking the way we operate, the recommendations, the way we believe we go and reduce emissions in a systems way, in a framework way, and spreading that message.
A question here from Matt Roderick. Hello again, Matt. You were presenting earlier on. The largest challenge is to move our industry from a pilot and trial culture to tangible action. How can we make this happen? Stuart, can I throw that to you briefly? Yes, we kind of referred to it. Talk is cheap. Actually, to make this happen on a large scale, well, that needs real leadership, real momentum. It's got to keep on moving in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because I work across various different markets and transportation, energy, defence, aviation, industry, central government. And what I see at the minute is a very buoyant marketplace. There's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of focus, but it is still very much centred around planning, strategic planning, which is perfectly logical thing to be doing and the right thing to be doing. But I would say in the round, there's not a huge amount of actual on the ground commitment to what is an emergency. So we've declared a climate emergency, and while we are making progress in certain quarters, I was talking to my energy director about the current construction run rate in the energy sector. Needing to meet the demands of a 2050 future where we're going to need a fourfold increase in capacity and build capacity and infrastructure commissioning across natural gas, biomass, nuclear, offshore wind, and so on. The current run rate as of 2019 was 43% of what was required. And you just see generally that there's an awful lot of ambition, there's a lot of intent, there's a lot of focus that we do between leadership and also
I guess, innovation and investment, we've got a challenge as a lot of companies, their corporate balance sheets are weakened, government's fiscal instruments and their ability to fund is all going to be pretty challenged in the coming years. So how we, again, this is where we need a fundamentally different way of engaging with this problem. If what we do in the coming months and years looks and feels similar to what we've always done in terms of how we engage with this problem and how we articulate what we want and how we buy it and how we've mapped the value outcomes we're actually seeking to deliver this. If that all looks and feels the same, I think the problem in the environment in which we are fast sort of delving into, I think we're probably going wrong. I see all of this, but I'm still seeing generally across the market no fundamental change in how people are then moving forward. Everything still feels very similar.
Look, I mean, we have more questions. We have questions about Ofgem's initial announcements this week, about policy changes, what we like to see. I think we've covered some of that. There are things clearly that aren't going wrong. There's a question here about, which is too big for us to answer right now, is 2050 going far and fast enough? An eternal question that, of course, we would like to comment on, but I'm afraid that's all that we have time for this episode and for the Future of Utilities, the online series. Thanks very much indeed to all of our speakers today and throughout our sessions. We've covered so many crucial questions, hopefully come up with quite a few excellent answers to, and a huge thank you to our sponsors who've made this episode and every episode possible.